For the record, we are at Charlevoix Public Library in Charlevoix, Michigan. This is Tuesday, November 20th, 2007. We are working on the Charlevoix Oral Traditions Project. Videographer Rick Pierpont and interviewer Judith Ivan, who is the Assistant Adult Services Librarian at the Charlevoix Public Library. And what happened in Pearl Harbor, and
we're rolling.
Where you were at the time of Pearl Harbor, everybody knows from our generation.
There were some things that happened before Pearl Harbor, too.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we want to get those.
Yeah.
Now, for the record, this is Tuesday, November 20th, 2007. We're at the Charlevoix Public Library in Charlevoix, Michigan, working on our Veterans History Project and Charlevoix Oral Traditions. We're with Bill and Mildred Darnton, and they're here to talk to us about World War II experiences, and Mildred's going to add a few things about her experiences on the home front in Charlevoix. To get started, where were you, Bill, before the war broke out?
Now you're asking questions I hadn't anticipated. My story about this war starts with September 1940, or 1939, excuse me, when I heard a speech by Adolf Hitler that was broadcast in the United States, and it was a speech that he gave in front of a mass crowd that sounded like an Ann Arbor football game. And in effect, it was the opening blow of World War II. And I could not understand all of the German, but I'd had a couple of years of German in high school, and I could sense a few words, and you could certainly sense the importance of the message he was distributing to his German supporters, and it was something that you certainly were concerned about and worried about from that day forward. The next point of interest might be that I was at the University of Michigan as a student at this time, and as you might anticipate, I was not much in favor of getting involved in a European war. And one of the most difficult days of my life was the October 16th of 1940, when all men of certain ages had to register for a first peacetime draft in the United States history. And I wouldn't claim to be a part of the anti-war group at the University of Michigan at this time, but I certainly was well aware of it, and not very pleased or happy with the fact that our country was in effect committing itself to a European war. At that time, there was no indication as far as the students were concerned that our war was going to be not only a European but also an Asian war with the Japanese. So that brings you up to having registered for the draft and getting a fairly low draft number. It was 1963, and at that time in 1940 or early 41, when I got that draft number, I was 22 years old, so I'm ripe for the picking, so to speak. And I decided that I was not going to be a member of the foot soldier army, that I knew enough about my own personality and what I enjoyed doing and what I didn't enjoy doing, and I decided that if I were going to be a part of the military, I wanted to be in the Navy. So I explored what was known in those days as the 90-Day Wonder Program. And this was a V-7 training program that the Navy ran. And the requirements were that you already have a bachelor's degree from a recognized college, and that was about all. I guess there was a second requirement that you had to be single. And I don't know, at that point, Mildred and I were a long ways from being committed to a marriage, so that being single was not a big problem at that time. But I gathered all of the information I needed to get into the V-7 program, such as the transcript of your credits and other information that would substantiate that you were a U.S. citizen, like a birth certificate and that sort of thing. And I put them all in an envelope and waited for the draft notice to be issued. And when the draft notice was issued, I was going to summer school at Northwestern University. My employment had been as a junior high school teacher in Flint, and I was teaching math classes to 7th and 8th graders. And during the summer vacation, this would have been the summer of 1941, I spent 6 or 7 weeks at Northwestern University doing some teacher training programs to work on other degrees and so forth and so on. So my father sent me my draft notice, which had been issued about the middle of July 1941. And I just went down to Navy Pier in Chicago and took my envelope full of credentials and joined the Navy. And the last item of business with the recruiting officer that signed me up was I showed him the draft notice and said, "What do I do about this?" And he said, "I'll take care of that." So
I've got you.
yeah. Now, interestingly enough, the chairman of the draft board was Ted McLogan's father, and you know the McLogan family, and I should be honest and say that the chairman of my draft board was pretty unhappy about my having decided to join the Navy after he had issued my draft notice. And he was instrumental in getting that policy changed. And I don't know that I was the only one that was doing it, but in any case, within a 6 months period, that policy of letting the recruiting officers for volunteer organizations negate draft notices, that was changed. And if your draft notice had been issued by, you were in the Army, whether you wanted to be or not.
Well, that's lucky for you. That was very lucky for you. So where were you on Pearl Harbor Day?
My turn? Well, I'd been working for IBM for quite a long time, International Business Machines, and in Chicago. And I had been in Flint, and on December 6th, I bought my wedding dress. I finally landed it. You might say you're got him to commit himself. So this was we were planning to be married after he got his commission, which would have been January 1942. And on the 7th of December, I got off the train from Flint to Chicago to go back to work and was met by a friend who said to me, the Japs are bombing Pearl Harbor. And I said, where's Pearl Harbor? No idea where it was. And of course, my second thought was, do I have to take my wedding dress back? So purely feminine reaction. So that's where I was back. And I remember the next day hearing President Roosevelt and his call to arms, so to speak, that we were the day that went down in infamy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's where I was. So,
well,
you want to know any more from there on?
Sure. To talk about the wedding, and then what happened. Where did the two of you go after that?
Okay. All right. Well, we were married on schedule in January. We were not able to send out invitations because we weren't sure whether Bill would have orders to go immediately after he got his commission. So my mother was prepared with a telephone brigade. And so we had quite a turnout from family and friends and the church members, and were married. And the next morning we took off on the Empire State train for New York. And we had just about 3 days in New York, and he had to report to Boston. And in Boston, we encountered the problem of where were they going to put us, or where were we going to find for ourselves. The first place we found was on the New York-New Haven railroad tracks right above, and that lasted one night, and we went looking for something else. And they found that we were to report to Boston, was it then?
Boston Navy Yard.
Yeah, Boston Navy Yard. And there they had a group of people who were taking upon themselves finding a place to live for these people in the service who were coming to town and, of course, couldn't buy or did not even engage in a loan contract. So we did find a place on Beacon Street in the old section overlooking the harbor, and unpacked and expected to be there for a while. And we stayed exactly 5 days. That was my first indication about being in the Navy meant. And we were told to transfer to Ithaca, New York.
This was a training class which was pretty elementary as far as the things that makes internal combustion engines, and particularly diesel engines, understandable to somebody that's going to have to look after them for the next X number of months. And it was a very wonderful place to have your first assignment as a full-fledged member of the naval forces. And when the program was completed, the school program was completed, I was retained by the school to be an instructor. And
that involved some problems for me, if you remember, because I had just taken a short leave from IBM and felt I still owed them, quote and unquote, in my own mind, 3 more months of work. And so they told I was needed at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft at Hartford, Connecticut. So that summer we spent with either one of us or both of us commuting on the train. And we usually met in Albany, New York on a weekend, and saw a good bit of the Poconos Mountains, and that part of it worked out. And in the meantime, I had to assure my friends and relatives back home that we were not separating already. That was an obligation to be taken care of. At the end of the summer, I then came back to Ithaca, and after that, followed wherever Bill's orders came from. It's, as Bill said, a wonderful, beautiful area to be, and the Navy people we met were very good. Only one thing still hanging over as we went down to dinner one night, and the guys were in their summer white uniforms, looking very fine. And we went down around a corner, and the other women and I were just back talking. And as the men went around a corner, some of the young men in a fraternity or a boarding house on the corner started making fun of them and calling them, you know, pretty boys and all sorts of nasty things. And then as we came around the corner, they looked very embarrassed and sort of slunk back into the house. And but that feeling was still on campus, that we didn't need to be in that war and so on. So
the thing that in retrospect is kind of important, I think, as far as our personal experiences have been up to this point, in that our country was totally unprepared for being involved in a war situation, and the transformation that was made in the civilian industry to get from consumer products to war materials was something that was just remarkable. And the same thing was true with regards to the training that those of us that were taken into the service got, because all of the things that happened to me in our service, in my service, prior to June of 1943, and we've told you up about until August of 42 or thereabout, all of the things that happened to me in that year and a half or almost 2 years since I'd signed up were in preparation for manning a new type of ship to the U.S. Navy known as a destroyer escort, which had the capabilities of being an anti-submarine vessel, but a long ways from being as complicated and expensive as a full-fledged naval ship that would do a lot of other things besides being an anti-submarine vessel. And you know, the fact that some 2 years before the ship was commissioned, I was already getting training and being given assignments that would prepare me for looking after the machinery and engines in a destroyer escort. And this is something that you only begin to realize in retrospect. You know, at the time it was happening, I could have cared less about the massive training job that was done. But the midshipman school for the 90-day wonders, for example, operated in two places, one at Northwestern University's downtown campus in Chicago, and the second place in New York City, where the first few classes that were held there were held on the Prairie State, which was the old battleship Illinois that had been converted into a training facility. And the school later expanded to use a dormitory on the campus at Columbia University, and there were about 500 of us in the midshipman class in which I was in, but before that training program was over, with the addition of facilities at Columbia University, the number in each class would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200. And in the 5 years that the school existed, it trained some 26,000 naval officers. So the numbers are pretty impressive when you see what was done not only in the industrial complex, it had to be completely transferred to war material as it was, but also in the training of people to operate these ships and equipment. And the same thing was going on in the Air Force, for example. It was really a remarkable training job that was done.
Yes, I thought that too. And of course, my being with IBM and being able to teach as well as to design systems on the new punch card was invaluable. And so wherever Bill was assigned, I would go to the office and they would say, "Where have you been? We've been waiting for you." So it worked out very well as a career. For example, in Miami Shipbuilding made the little pleasure boats, but for the war, they made the PT boats, as they were called, that were fast little things that were to pick up flyers who may have been in planes and had parachuted out for safety, hoped they could, and for other things. And they gave me a chance to take a ride on one of them. And so for the first time, I got out and saw what the Gulf Stream looked like. It really was a different color. So that was one experience. And another one was Pratt & Whitney aircraft, where that was where we did the commuting between Hartford and Ithaca. And the one particularly was in California, had been an agricultural machine. It was called John Bean Food Machine Company. And they were making the water buffalo, as it was called, and that is a tank that can go through water and off the ships and on land. And that was a rather peculiar test drive also that I was able to do.